Welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Lynn Berger, host of Lynn Berger Interviews Remarkable People. And today I have the privilege of speaking with Randy Florke. Randy is a real estate and design expert specializing in country style. He is the owner of a real estate business called The Rural Connection, based in the lower Hudson Valley, and he has written books on real estate, and he has done so much more. You will enjoy this interview. Randy, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Take us back to your earlier days, and did you know what you wanted to do?
Did I know what I wanted to do? That's a tough question. I knew I wanted to move to New York. I grew up on a farm in Iowa as a poor dirt farmer, and I knew that I wanted to live in a big city. Mm-hmm. And so that I knew from an early age. But exactly what I wanted to do actually came much later in a way. I moved to New York at 18, and I lived at the YMCA on the Upper West Side for a couple years and went to school for fashion. And so I worked in fashion early on, and I actually really didn't like it at all. I found it too temporary, like too seasonal. Everything was like, was popular right now, and then it just didn't feel right to me. But I felt like with like interior design and houses and stuff, you got that same kind of stimulus that you get from fashion, but it was more permanent. And so I thought they were very relatable, and I migrated into that.
Well, there was a period of time for that to happen, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I didn't start working in interior design until the late 80s, early 90s, when I was living in Spain. I was living in Madrid and started working as an assistant to a designer. And when I came back to New York in the early 90s, I went back to fashion for a hot minute, but then decided it wasn't for me and went back to interior design before going into my own business.
Okay, so lead us through that, how you created this unbelievable business with beautiful homes and beautiful interior design. How did it all happen?
So I got a job with a big interior designer here in New York, and I was working with him, and he did very high-end stuff, which was never necessarily my genre, so to speak. I am a humble farmhouse kind of person. But I knew that it was better to work with somebody who did over the top expensive stuff, because I could always scale back to my style. But if I ever got the opportunity to do that work, the high end stuff, and I didn't know it, it's harder to learn it. And so I worked with him, and then I left. I rented a U-Haul truck and went to the Midwest and bought farm distressed furniture, drove back to New York and sold it in the flea market. In 6 weeks, I made enough money to open a store in the West Village.
Oh my goodness.
And I had that store for many, many years. And that store led me to real estate when I started selling houses in Sullivan County, weekend houses. And then I moved into the Hudson Valley, and now we do from the lower Hudson Valley to the Catskills, and we specialize basically in second homes. Most of our clients are people who live in the city that are looking for a weekend or vacation place, and we help them find the house, renovate the house, restore it, and interior design as well. So I realized early on when I was doing real estate that I was missing out on a lot of customers because they lived in the city and they were afraid to take on a project. They're like, well, it needs new bathrooms, and I live in the city, what am I going to do? And so we started to offer that service, and then I could just scoop up a lot more customers because I took that fear away from them.
Well, that's a lucky customer.
Yeah.
You don't have to deal with all these people.
Right. I mean, I would say all of my business has been very organic in a way. In other words, I didn't go to business school, and I didn't put together a business proposal. I just went with my gut and felt like when there was a need, I tried to meet it, and it's how I expanded my business.
Well, I'm sure there were challenges along the way.
Of course.
Do you want to share some?
You know, I think I've had trouble in ways that like a lot of entrepreneurs do, and that is expanding my business to have other people be able to do what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have agents who work for me and they do fine and it's great. And I have assistant in interior design and stuff like that. But I'm really a relational person, and my clients and customers really expect to like have a relationship directly with me, and I've not been as good as some people are at like handing them off to somebody else. And so therefore I think there's probably a cap on how big your business can be when you're doing it all yourself.
But that's what you want.
That's what I want. And I'm a big believer, like it's better to have a piece of the pie than no pie at all. And so like I do my thing, I have a niche, and I'm not trying to be everybody else.
Well, I really like how you said that. You know yourself, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm a big believer that to be successful, you have to be authentic. And so I don't pretend to be anybody I'm not. I'm not trying to be necessarily some kind of role model or whatever. I just live authentically, and I don't pretend that I'm from something I'm not. And I think that comes through, and I've been able to create this world like that extends as far as like interior design, where like I create a marriage between pedestrian and pedigree. If you have most of your stuff that's like kind of normal secondhand antique-y stuff, but if you dot it with a few things that are like pedigree, then people are like confused, like, well, maybe that stuff is too, I just don't recognize it or whatever. And so it's like it's a nice way of like being aspirational without being intimidating, I think. I work hard like trying to make each project individual and reflect the owners of the house, not just mine. Like many designers, you can open a page of a magazine and instantly be like, oh, that's so and so. They have their trademark style and whatever. I actually try not to put that imprint on my projects because I really want a house to reflect the owner themselves. Ultimately, they're the ones who have to live in it.
Absolutely. And I want to share that some of these homes are incredible, and the authentic nature, and you could tell you make them very, very personal.
Yeah,
that's nice. And I I think I watched a video when you talked about real estate as matchmaking.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think what happens in real estate a lot, really a lot, is the real estate agents or brokers interview or listen to the customers or their clients, and they listen, but they can't imagine that person is telling them that they really want that. They can't step out of their own value system. And so they end up showing them places that are what they think they should buy as opposed to what they're really looking for. And I think like I do a good job of listening to people and really interpreting that. And I say that I'm good at two things in life, real estate and matchmaking. I think that they're very related, because if you listen to somebody, a client who's looking for a house, and then you find that's a marriage in itself. And if you just transfer that characteristics to another human being, it's like you just like, oh, that's who I know somebody who's looking for somebody like you.
Well,
so
I think people appreciate that. No, I get a sense you love what you do.
I do. I will say in 1996, I had an antique store on Perry Street, and I was really struggling. Like, business wasn't great. I had already started to take care of my son, and I had no money. And a friend told me, if you want to be successful, like you have to line up what you like to do with what you can make money at. Because there's a lot of people who go to work every day and hate what they do but make a lot of money. And there's other people who love what they do but don't make enough to pay their rent. Neither one of those cases are successful. And so it was just a concept I had not really thought of for myself. And so every decision I made after that point was like, okay, do I love doing this? Am I going to be able to make money at it? And most of the times that really allows you to be successful because you're more passionate about it. You're more enthusiastic, and you spread that kind of joy.
Yeah.
When I started selling $100,000 farmhouses 2 hours from New York City from my antique store in the West Village, people were like, how can you make a living selling places that cheap? But it was like volume, and it was like what I loved. And they're like, well, you have a real estate office now in New York. Why don't you sell real estate in New York City? And it's like, it's not because I love real estate. It's because I love houses. And so if you're doing what you love and not just to make money, I think it makes for a happier life.
Well, you seem very happy.
Yeah.
And his homes are unbelievable. And it appears you love beautiful things.
I do.
Was that early on? Did you recognize this? Or
You know, I've been with my husband for 31 years or whatever, but we were together 22 years before we got married 9 years ago. And my sister got up at my wedding and gave a toast. And the first thing she said was, Randy's the same person today he was growing up. When we played with toys, he always had to have the biggest house and the most cars and everything. And he's still that person. So, like, I always loved farming, but I wanted, like, a tidy farm. I didn't want, like, everything, all the equipment and the tractors and everything, like, all over. I wanted, like, things really tidy. I wanted more of a Connecticut gentleman's farm. And like, I was able to, like, line that up.
and there was a story I heard you said when you were younger, when you went to school on the school bus.
Right.
You sat on one side going there and one side going back because there was a beautiful.
Yeah, when I was a kid, we lived on a gravel road on a farm, and I had to take the school bus to and from school. And in the mornings, I would sit on the right side, and in the afternoon, I would sit on the left side, because we went by this acreage, this farm, and I was like, when I get big, I'm going to buy that place. And you could barely see it. It was so overgrown and mysterious and whatever. And so I did. I was living in Europe, again in the late 80s, and I was like, I'm going to buy that house for when I go home, I'll stay there instead of staying with my family. And so I did. I restored it.
Oh,
and
you did
yeah,
buy
it was
it.
my first house.
Oh,
Yeah.
do you still own that house?
I don't. I sold it, I don't know, 5 or 7 years ago. I ended up not going very much. And it was just kind of sitting there, and somebody made me an offer and I sold it. And I still kind of regret it, because, you know, you get money for something and you're like, I don't know, you pay your bills
right,
or whatever, and it's gone.
Right.
And it seems important at the time, but then on reflection, it's like, why did I sell that? Like, it was, you know.
Well, you
wasn't
had it was a
expensive.
dream.
It was a
that-
dream.
that
It was a
hap-
dream, but like, I was just had migrated to other places, and
Oh,
you know.
sure. It's hard to
yeah.
do everything. Which brings me to a good point. How do you manage your personal and business life? You have a full life.
Yeah. You know, how do I manage? I incorporate it. Like, my kids, we have 3 kids, and they're older now, but they've been to more closings and home inspections and construction sites than most lawyers and project managers, and you know, I brought them along. I incorporated them in my life. So even when you feel like you're doing mundane stuff, you're still making a connection. And and I work really hard, like really hard. And I want them to see that. Like, you know, I think when you like what you do, it doesn't feel like work. And when you like your family, it doesn't feel like a chore. And so it's easy to like multitask and do. And I can be watching TV and be on my phone shopping for furniture for a client, and it doesn't feel like, oh, dang, I wish I could pay attention to this. I'm like excited by both things. And, you know, I think when you have your own business, it is a marriage, and you work all the time. Like if you want to be successful, you have to work.
You can't turn it off.
You can't turn it over. And so, and when I started my business, like I said, I rented the truck myself, I loaded it myself, I unloaded it myself. I felt like before I could hire somebody else to do that for me, I needed to know what it was like to do it myself. Because then I knew nobody could take advantage of me. Nobody could tell me it was harder than it was or it was easier than it was. If they were come to me and were like, oh, I can do that in one day, like I knew better. You know, I'd done it myself. I'd be like, you know, you're just going to come back to me and you're going to fail on your expectations. Like I knew what to expect. And I thought that was really an important lesson and valuable.
Very, very wise. Yeah, I mean, are there any other lessons for someone starting out as an entrepreneur or even just starting out and opening yourself up to the world of work? You surely did that.
Yeah. The only businesses I've ever failed at are ones that we did a business plan and mapped it all out and did spreadsheets, and they're the only ones I ever failed
Really?
at. Yeah. Yeah, I'm much better off with like going with your instincts and your gut, because a business plan is only as good as the number of people that walk through your door or the people that call you. You know what I mean? If they don't, then your business plan is worthless. So like find a good idea and be passionate about it. Of course, like, you know, research, like what's rent going to cost for an office? What is it? But I think people immediately expect it to be successful, and they go out and they immediately get a great office and they hire. Like you have to build the runway before the plane can take off. And don't be embarrassed because you went to the Salvation Army and bought a desk instead of ordering a brand new contemporary. You know what I mean? Like make do and like grow into it. And I know that there's advantages to letting people think you're successful. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, he must be making so much money. He's driving this car, doing that or whatever. I just like found it better to be relatable, and like people want to associate with people who are working hard. I think the huge advantage for me coming from a family that was like dirt poor was that there was no safety net. I moved to New York at 18 years old, like I said, and lived at the YMCA. I asked my parents for $20 a month when I moved here, and they said no, they couldn't afford it. I had saved $6,800 raising pigs in high school, and that's what I moved to New York with. And so I had no safety net. I knew what it was like to be poor, so I wasn't scared of it. So I wasn't scared to take a risk. I think so many people have this like safety net. And I'm not talking about people who are rich, because rich people like have a different kind of formula going on. I'm talking about people whose like parents help them out or pay for college or this and that. They don't want to offend their parents because like they're not doing what they want them to do. And so they don't take that risk for themselves, and they're less successful than they could be because they're like so afraid that their parents are going to be upset with them or cut them off or disinherit them or whatever. I didn't have any of those concerns. Like I was free from it.
Now, I know you have a change on the horizon.
I do.
You're going to be moving.
Yeah. So my husband, you know, who many might know, was a congressman for 10 years in the Hudson Valley, and finished Congress in January and was nominated by President Biden to be an ambassador based in Paris for a multilateral organization, the OECD, which is a organization for economic cooperation and development. And it's technically it's the 38 richest democracies in the world, and helps set international tax policies and all that stuff. A very not one of the fluffy ambassador jobs. It's a much more kind of intellectual, brainy job that is a lot of work. So we're going to be moving to Paris, and which is great because I love Paris. I moved to Paris 40 years ago. I was working as a model, and I had met a girl, and it was a friend, and said, come live with me. And so I showed up on her doorstep, and it was a 5th floor walk up in Paris, and I was so poor I didn't have money for suitcases, so I brought my stuff in cardboard boxes, and I just loved it from the first minute and thought it was great. And like, it's interesting to be parallel moving back 40 years later under very different circumstances. And so I'm looking forward to the juxtaposition, shall we say. But I still have the same group of friends that I had 40 years ago. I turned 60 in December, and I did a dinner in Paris because many of my closest relationships
That's
were there,
fantastic.
and that was long. That was before I believe we knew that this was going to happen. Yeah, it was, and so it's a very home away from home for us, for me.
That sounds very
It's really
exciting.
exciting.
So have you figured out how you're going to manage your business? Or
Carefully. The thing is about construction and decorating projects, they can be a long time in the making.
Right.
So I can start something today, and like you're not putting shovels in the ground for a year by the time. And so it is not, and we won't be there permanently. So it's a year or two. And so I'll be back and forth. I'm going to be more selective on the projects I do, and the timing sequences have to work and
Right.
make sense. But I'm hoping that like I learn more from being there, from what I'll miss on my own being here for my business here. I'm hoping that I don't even know what I'm going to learn. I mean, just going to the Paris flea market every Sunday, the knowledge and the inspiration and the objects that you find, I think will be really rewarding and help me in my business. Not to mention, I hope to pick up some jobs there while I'm there and go back and forth.
Well, I would say your career has not been linear in the
No,
way. You
no.
can, as you said, you're the jack of all home trades.
Yeah.
You want to tell us some more about that?
Well, that was the New York Times described me as that, so that's not my own phrasing. But I do. I mean, I do everything. Like if I sell a house and the people leave it furnished and the new owners don't want it furnished, I will take all that furniture and I will find a new home for it, and I don't throw anything away. Only person who can have a 4-day estate sale and still have a full bar or have it full again. So.
And when you buy these things, do you change them or you keep them in their original form?
Yeah, I mean, my books that I've done have been basically on reusing, repurposing, and recycling. And so I'm a big believer in like reupholstering furniture, refinishing things, painting stuff. I hate to see stuff go to the dump. Such a waste. And oftentimes what you're throwing away is much better quality than what you're purchasing. Like furniture, like clothing, has become very disposable. It's not expected to have a life expectancy. I was with my landscaper today, and she had a flood in these recent Hudson Valley floods, and her washer and dryer were in the basement, and the dryer got ruined. And her dryer was 23 years old and like worked perfectly and would still be working if it hadn't been for the flood. And if you rebuy that, it's going to last 5 years if you're lucky.
If you're lucky.
It's not meant to last long.
Right.
And that just seems so wasteful to me.
So is the barn still full?
Of course. Of course. And I'll open the doors and like people will come and buy the goodies and we'll do the next.
Okay. So tell us, we have a few more minutes, but I'd love to hear about your books. And I know you said once you referred to your book as a calling card.
Right. Well, it's like some people need a resume to get a job or whatever, or their LinkedIn profile or whatever it is. If I'm up for a gig, whether it's a decorating gig or a TV appearance or whatever, like you can just send somebody your book and you don't even need an explanation. It's just like, it's kind of validating for people and I've done, I don't know, 3 or 4 books, and it's, it's one of those exercises. When I spoke before about being successful, about lining up what you love to do with what you can make money in, that's the lopsided one. You can love doing it. You're not going to make a lot of money.
But you're proud of it.
But you're proud. And you reap other benefits because you've done it.
Because from what I could see from your work, you make the ordinary extraordinary.
I try. It's like, I think people get so caught up in labels and designer names and whatever that they forget what it's like to like have things you love. They think they're supposed to love those things, and it's like, I don't know if it's insecurity or what, but you know, it's like it's much better to have things that you genuinely love, not because a decorator's told you they're really good. It's expensive, and
Right.
you know, and it's like that's not. It's certainly not where I get my
Well, it's, advertising.
right,
It's
influences.
yes, yeah. You're coming from the place of, do you like it?
Yeah. Yes, and like when I'm showing houses, I tell people, you know, when they've seen something they think they like, if you don't go home at night and dream about it, think about it, keep you awake at night, like, oh my God, I can do this, I can do that, then move on. You're buying, you know what I mean? Like you have to have that emotional connection. Otherwise, you're buying the wrong place.
But you know that when you find it.
But you know it.
Right.
You know it. And like sometimes people just force it.
And then they regret it.
And they regret it. It's like a marriage.
Any major decision, right?
Exactly.
So we have about a minute more.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you would have liked to share with our audience today that you weren't able to about your fascinating career and the experiences you've had?
You know, I think if you can take the time to enjoy the journey, it goes so fast. And we're so busy that we don't necessarily mark the milestones in what we do. And I think if you can have that joy along the way, it's helpful with the journey.
Oh, I think that is wonderful advice.
Oh,
and
thank you.
You appreciate it, you enjoy it, and
Yeah.
you get stronger.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. What a fun afternoon.
Oh, thank you.
And if there's any contact information you'd like to share with the audience, go ahead.
They can go to my website, theruralconnection.com, or they can do it with my name too. It's randyflorke.com. And my last name is spelled Florke. It'll take them to the same site, and they can. It has our philosophy, it has our experience, it has houses for sale, everything.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
And nice.